I'm going to invert a joke that I use virtually every time I speak. I'm going to tell you that just a few days ago, I was in Chicago, and now I'm back, but I greatly enjoyed my visit to the United States of America while I was there. And when I tell people this, that I come from California and I enjoy coming to visit them in America, they laugh, and they laugh for a good reason. And the reason is that this state has developed the kind of reputation that really is something we should all be ashamed of, I think. And I know many of us who are on this side of the aisle are ashamed of it. The California really only has one problem. The problem with California is Californians, pretty much it, really, honestly. If it weren't for that, it'd be without question the most wonderful place in the world to live. But we have, I think, as I mentioned in that article that I included in your program, I genuinely believe that all of our problems essentially stem from the fact that this is such a beautiful place to live, and it is so safe, so secure, so wealthy for so many people, that we simply can lose touch with reality in California because we can afford to lose touch with reality in California. Now, when you look at the state, you'll notice that the state is actually pretty red state. The big middle of the state is all red. The reason it's red is because there are farmers there. And farmers don't get to sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon and visualize indigo auras around their crops in order to make them grow better. They have to get up, they have to work, they have to deal with water shortages and all the rest. Those people tend to vote Republican, tend to be conservative because they are actually in contact with reality. But when you get to the to the coast, to these coastal elites, they're so far from reality that they just simply have no idea what the world is actually like. So let's get started on some specifics about some of the things we can do maybe to help turn this around and save California. About, say 9 months ago, I was at an event in Irvine for TPUSA, and I'd been there once before, and apparently I made too much of an impression on the students, so they decided this time I had to share the stage with a Democrat. And I ended up on the same stage debating a woman who was, I think, like a city council person for one of the cities down there. I think it was Irvine or something. Poor woman. And we started debating about the whole thing of California. And I said, you know, this is not a hard thing to figure out. You have an opinion, I have an opinion. You think California is better run by Democrats, I think by Republicans. But this is something that's not just theoretical. This is actually subject to empirical proof. How many of you, I said down there, I said, how many of you came down here from Los Angeles? And most of the people raised their hands. And I said to them, do you remember as you were coming south out of Los Angeles that the roads were just like third world quality, and that there was garbage everywhere, and that everything was choked off and potholes and everything, and all of a sudden you hit a point and the road just went and it's perfectly smooth, and the exits are perfectly manicured, and there's beautiful grass everywhere? Well, that line is the difference between where Democrats run things and where Republicans run things. And anybody can see it. Anybody can see it. So her response was, well, we've been running California for 40 years now, Democrats, 30, 40 years. If we're so bad, we've been running California for 40 years, and California has the 7th largest economy in the world. I said, that's true. Before you started running California, it was the 5th largest economy in the world. And so on and on and on we go. But I think you can really get to the nature of the problem when you realize that you'll hear progressives talk about California as the richest state in the union. We're not the richest state in the union. We're the poorest state in the union. By any accounting that anybody in the real world understands, you have assets and you have liabilities. California has tremendous income still, despite what they're doing. But we also have debt that is simply unbelievable, astronomical. And when you put it on a balance sheet, we're probably the poorest state in the union. And they just don't understand that debt is part of a financial equation, that just simply escapes them. And this is really the problem that we have in California. We have too much government, and the government that we have has never run real jobs where you have to account for assets and liabilities on the same page. So this is a serious problem. And you want to ask yourself, you know, how much money is enough for these people? I had this thought, you know, when I was thinking about the roads. My wife, I just married somebody from Russia. And I was, you know, in that full kind of, you know, American kind of, you know, well, we have indoor plumbing here, you know, and we have electrified this and electrified that. She flew into Los Angeles airport. She couldn't believe how decrepit it was compared to the airports in Moscow. The streets in Moscow are perfectly maintained. They're spotless. The city is spotless. She was heartbroken to come to Los Angeles, California, and see how filthy it was and how run down it was. And you ask yourself, when they take so much money from us and conditions are so bad, how much money is enough? And then I realized, you know, when I was thinking about the roads, I was driving along and just getting rattled to death and my teeth getting knocked loose. And I saw one of these adopt a highway signs. You guys seen those before, right? Where it's like, this section of the highway is maintained by Johnny's dry cleaning store. Well, then I realized, wait a minute, Johnny is paying for this road 3 times. Johnny's dry cleaning is getting taxed for the road. Johnny's getting taxed for the road. And now Johnny is writing a check in addition to this to keep the road maintained, and they still can't do it. They still can't do it. And this is when I had the thunderbolt of an idea, because this is when I began to realize what the problem really is with California. The problem with California, and for people like us who are sensible people, many of us have to run businesses and so on. We look at the policies of this state with taxation and all the regulations and everything else, and we say, what's the matter with these people? Why don't they understand? People are leaving the state, businesses are leaving the state faster than we can track them. If you want to rent a U-Haul truck from Los Angeles to Houston, it's $3,200, but to take it from Houston to Los Angeles is $400. And the reason is because nobody's moving here. They got to get the trucks back here so more people can move out. And when you have all of these policies in place, you have to ask yourself, why don't these people understand? What's the matter with them? Why don't they understand? And this is when the thunderbolt hit me, folks. And I think if you can get this into your head, you will really begin to understand this state that we live in much, much better. It's not that they don't understand that their policies destroy businesses and take away people's lives. It's not that they don't understand it. It's just that they don't care. They don't care. If they have a regulation, somebody's driving a truck and maybe the container on something comes loose and somebody's decided that if you feed 100 tons of this stuff to 200 gerbils, 1 in 7 is going to get cancer 4 years from now. Therefore, it's a toxic substance. Therefore, this guy's in violation of environmental laws because he didn't have something on his truck locked down. Therefore, there's a $300,000 fine to that little one-person trucking company. Therefore, that trucking company goes out of business. Their 5 employees are now on the state dole. All of the rest of this stuff downstream, you'd think, who would think about this? And they don't care. They got their $300,000 fine, and that's all they care about. It's pretty simple, really. It's actually very simple. If you talk to progressives, you'll hear this all the time, that the evil people go into business and the good people go into government. Well, this is also a provable hypothesis. Let's assume that's true. If the tremendously ethical, morally advanced people went into government, then it seems to me that California would have excellent roads and very reasonable pension plans. Because that's what good people would do, right? Good people, ethical people, the progressive idea of government people would go, they'd provide top quality services, and they take just enough for themselves to get by. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the entire state is crumbling. The private sector retirement benefits are about half of what a California employee makes. And in many cases, you find in places like Fontana or something like that, with various cities that we saw these scandals with a year or two ago. What they'll do is something like this. Let's say that you're the director of water for the city of Fontana. I'm making these numbers up, but just you get the idea. And if you are the director of the water for Fontana, then you retire with a $250,000 a year retirement, let's say. So the guy becomes director of the Department of Water in Fontana, and he holds a job for about 3 months, and then he retires with his $250,000, and then a new guy comes up. And now he's the director of the water supply who gets to retire on $250,000 a month. And that person holds a job for 7, 8 months. They retire, and a new person comes up, and they get the $250,000 retirement that comes from that position, and so on and so on and so on, because it's not their money and they don't care. The entire attitude of California is very simple, really. you can say to these people in Sacramento, and this is the response you will get, businesses are leaving California because the taxes are too high. California's response is, well, if businesses are leaving, our revenue base is down. That means we have to raise taxes some more. In aviation, we call this a death spiral, because you start to get in a turn and you can't see where you're going and you keep turning tighter to get out of the turn, you just go right into the ground. And that's exactly where we're heading, and we're headed there for the same reasons, because these people don't care. It's not that they don't know. This took me forever to figure out. It probably still hasn't sunk into you, because decent people simply cannot imagine that there could be people that vile as to be willing to ruin a business that employs 50 people so that they can get 10% of the fine. I don't know if that's true in California. I know I just got back from Illinois, and I found out there that they have a policy in Illinois. I'm sure it must be true here. We lead the world in idiotic policies. We can't possibly be second place on this. But basically what I found out was, if you're a whistleblower and you basically report your company to the state and they fine the state $100,000, you get $20,000. You have an incentive to destroy your own company for your own personal benefit. And the state gets their 80 grand. And the state gets everything else when they set up these speed traps. So they put 15 cop cars in one place looking for the slightest thing they can do so that they can write a ticket. That's not the same as legitimate law enforcement, where you see somebody who's clearly a danger, clearly out of line. It's simply a revenue source. It's a net. Cars are going past us. We'll find some of them. We'll pull them over at random. I'm sure we'll find something. We'll write a ticket. There'll be more revenue for the state, and we get to retire on this big, big money. And the reason for this is very simple. If you're not very ambitious, or you're not very smart, or you're not very hardworking, it will soon dawn on you that it's easier to tax a company than it is to run a company. And that our people in Washington especially, and in Sacramento as well, have gotten used to riding around in limousines and private jet travel and being called the honorable this and my friend the great state of that, and all of these benefits. And if you're a politician, you'll go out to dinner one night and somebody will casually say what your favorite brand of scotch is. You'll find out the next morning that a case of it has been delivered to your doorstep anonymously. Of course they want these benefits, and all they have to do to get them is simply just knock on some doors. And in the cases of most people in this state, they don't even have to get elected. They just get appointed. So why is this bad? You know, sometimes we have to get down to brass tacks on this, because when you're talking with progressives and liberals that run this state, we'll talk about these problems that too much government have, and they'll say, so what's wrong with all of this? Well, I was in Chicago. I was talking with a guy who I've gotten to admire very much named Gary Rabine. He calls himself the ditch digger entrepreneur. Gary grew up in a house where the bathtub was a muddy pool out back, and if it was above 60 degrees, Dad sent him out every morning into this mud pool with a bar of soap and take your bath out there. That's the kind of place Gary grew up with. Gary's now got something called the Rabine Group, which is hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And Gary, basically for me, broke out on a whiteboard all of his different companies and what all these companies do and how they're connected and how they work with each other and so on. And I realized something I never realized before, that private enterprise is better than the state because it has more surface area. It's got a greater surface area. What does that mean? Well, it means, for example, if you want something paved in a system that's run by the state, you've got a big round sphere called the state, and there's a paving department, and the person running that paving department is probably a nephew of somebody or other, has never been in the paving business, never gone out there and done the job. And you have this massive, enormous thing with just this one surface on it. But what Gary showed me was that small businesses break down and move and adopt and change and spin off other ones. So now we'll start insuring this. Hey, we're running so many trucks, let's get into the fuel business, do all this other stuff. And they just break down and fill in all the cracks. And in every single one of those places where those private businesses touch the clients, which is us, they have to provide better service, better value at a lower price, or else they go out of business. Of course their surface area is bigger. They're trying to make as many people as happy as they possibly can. The job of the state is to make as many people miserable as they possibly can, unless you're inside the state, in which case, anything that happens that raises the revenues for the state of California is good news, even if it means destroying the revenue base of California. They don't care. They're not going to be around long enough to care. They know there's money out there, and they're going to get it. So this puts us in rather a pickle, doesn't it? So we now get down to the key question, which is, what can we actually do about this? Well, I don't know. I know that's not what you came here to say, but I don't know. On my dark days, and I have dark days, and they're pretty much cured by coming to events like this, and I'm not just shoveling sunshine your way. Often, there are so many times when I simply think that these problems are intractable and they're not solvable, and that the solution will come when we're all, out on the streets eating rats on spits over burning tires. But then I come in and talk to people like this, and I see people like you who still understand how this works, still care about what happens. And then I go also into other places in the country, and I realize that underneath the surface of these left coast elitists that have so much power in terms of the message, so much power in terms of the pop culture, that I realize that underneath this veneer of vulgarity and laziness and immorality, underneath this is a core of people who really are the best people in the world. Honestly, the most generous, hardworking, decent people in the world, and they are still innovating, and they are still coming up with ways to pave parking lots. Gary Rabine has a machine that has a laser that uses GPS so that it can very, very slightly change the depth of the asphalt as it goes over the ground, because that means there are no voids and no hollow places to crack. He has GPS-driven, laser precision paving machines, because those machines allow him to provide a better product at a lower price. And if you think that the state of California is ever going to come up with something like that, or ever going to employ something like that, you're out of your minds. You're out of your minds. So I think most of the fight is obviously in Sacramento right now, but I think personally, from where I come from, our job right now is to simply hang on. We just have to hang on. We have to basically do the kind of political fights that you're going to hear later on today, talk about all of these things that we can do, actual political things on the ground, and those things we need to do to hang on. But our actual future is going to be dependent on the pop culture. And by that I mean it's going to be dependent on the overall culture. It's going to be dependent on what young people think, because pretty soon young people get to be older and then they start voting, and that's the way it goes. And I'm not impressed by the values that have been put into this younger generation. So many times I want to take it out on these kids. I hold them in such low esteem, these millennials, and then I realize, wait a minute, they didn't educate themselves. They're not the ones who came up with the, hey, nobody comes in first and we're not going to keep score. They didn't do that. That's not their choice. Somebody else did that to them. These progressive people who have this theory that, broccoli should be granted full human rights status before the United Nations and so on, that these people can fool around like this because they've been able to get away with it. But those days, I think, are rapidly coming to a close. So just in conclusion, let me say a couple things here. You're going to see later on today one of the people I admire the most in the whole country, Charlie Kirk, who's taking TPUSA and trying to change the culture of campuses around the country. But when I look at Berkeley and places like that, I begin to think, that's it. That university's finished. There's no reason to go. We don't need bricks and ivy anymore. I was a college dropout. Everything I learned on my own, which is why I'm so correct about so many things. But seriously, the world is changing, and we have the means through the internet to do something that we've never been able to do before. Because basically, when it's said and done, everything I just described about California is a result of elites. It's a result of people who live in castles, who don't connect to the people in the real world, making decisions that affect them but not us. In other words, Mark Zuckerberg can say, we don't need a border wall. We should let everybody who wants to come into the country whenever they want to. And Mark Zuckerberg can afford to say that because Mark Zuckerberg has bought 4 properties surrounding his property. He has created a compound much larger than the difference between the border wall down there, that neutral area. And if anybody steps foot on Mark Zuckerberg's property without his permission, they are arrested by a private police force before they can get the first syllable out of their mouths. So he can talk about this all he wants to because he does not have to suffer the consequences of it. He doesn't have to live with it. He doesn't have to deal with it. And that is our problem right there. Right there. So I think the only thing we can say about it is this. We can tell the truth. We have tremendous things stacked against us. Entropy is against us. Laziness, all of this stuff is against us. But the truth is on our side. The truth is a valuable ally. Because you can't really create darkness. You can only block the light. You can only paper up the windows. There's not a darkness generator you can put in a room to make darkness. You can only block the light. So showing the light has a lot of advantages. And when people talk about the cultural disadvantages we have, and they say, oh, you know, pop culture is owned by Hollywood, and the pop culture is so left-wing, and movies and television and all this, so left-wing, there's no way we can overcome it. It's unbelievable, it's unbearable. I actually used to think that myself until I realized, no, wait a minute, hold on. All of movie making is conservative. It's made by liberals, but movies are conservative because movies are about individuals. In other words, James Bond doesn't confront the evil villain with a strongly worded letter from the United Nations and then drive off in a Prius at a reasonable speed. That's not how storytelling works. Storytelling is about individuals. It's about people committing acts of heroism or cowardice. Basically, storytelling it's a man with a gun and a fast car trying to save the beautiful girl before the earth is destroyed by the evil villain. That's basically storytelling. That's intrinsically conservative. How many times have these pro-gun control advocates like Matt Damon and Jamie Foxx, how many people have they shot on camera, I want to know? Thousands, thousands. So, okay, Jamie, if you want to be, you don't like Sandy Hook, then just sign a pledge that you'll never, ever, ever hold a gun in a movie again, and you'll never be in a movie where anybody holds a gun ever again. And this is where our leverage is. And the final thing I think that's some good news looking forward is while these millennials tend to be very left-wing and call themselves socialists and mostly Bernie supporters, here's what's interesting about them. When you give them their own money and their own time, they buy computer games. And what do they do in these computer games? They make money and they arm themselves to the teeth. Those are the two things that they do when you leave them alone in the dark. In other words, this entire millennial generation is spending all of its money and all of its time to live in a world where they can act like conservatives. It's true, absolutely true. One of the things I'm trying to do moving forward is to get into that computer game world, not to start our own computer game, a conservative computer game. What does that look like? Well, I'm going to get into my fully insured SUV, drive down to the bank, deposit some money, come home, have dinner with the wife. That's not exactly compelling information or a fun computer game, but we can get our values into that game to the degree where we can basically say this: you are in this world now, in this virtual world, and the decisions that you make in this virtual world where there's nobody to tell you how evil you are the decision to make money and to protect yourself. And if it works in here, it works out there as well. And it's actually pretty simple. So despite the fact that so much is stacked against us, human nature, storytelling, all of these things are on our side. And if we don't take advantage of it, then we deserve to lose this beautiful paradise that we're in. But I don't think we're going to lose it, because I think when you get right down to brass tacks, whether or not the progressives want to get in touch with reality, sooner or later, reality is going to get in touch with the progressives, and that's when the rubber hits the road, and that's when all of a sudden the values that we hold dear suddenly become very, very important.